Well, shalom once again, and welcome to the Superheroes for the Messianic Lifestyle here on lamnetwork.tv, where we interview people who have been walking the life of Torah for a while now, to give you hope that you're not alone in your understanding that God still cares about his commandments, still considers them the standard of a holy life, and wants us to live by them through the lens of the finished work of Yeshua the Messiah. My name is Darryl Weinberg of Light to the Nations Messianic Ministries, and I am honored to be your host. And this evening, we have a wonderful opportunity to interview a couple of grizzled veterans of the Jewish believing lifestyle and ministry. And they have a fascinating story to tell. And so I want to bring in David and Joni Abramski. Welcome, folks, to the show, and Chag Sameach to you.
Chag Sameach.
Yeah,
Shalom.
Shalom.
Great to be here.
Thank
What
you.
a privilege to have you on. I know that you've got quite a story to tell us and a journey to share with us. And thank you so much for joining us this evening. It's great to have you on board. So, David, you and I have a bit of a connection.
Mm-hmm. That's right, eh?
Yes.
Yep, Toronto born. You're Canadian as well.
Yep. We grew up a very short distance from each other, just a couple of city blocks, as a matter of fact.
Yeah,
Amazing.
that's right.
And,
Toronto for most of my life.
mhm.
And a little bit of living in Thunder Bay too. So I managed to get out to the boonies of Ontario and really see it wasn't just all Toronto. Yeah.
North side of Lake Superior, my goodness.
Mm-hmm.
I hear it gets a little windy up there.
Just a little.
You loved it.
I loved it. Loved
Yeah.
it. Yeah. Great.
Loved that experience.
And that's kind of where I really started to realize I'm not in control of this world, and there is something outside of me that's bigger. Yeah.
The hinterland will certainly tell you that. I think there's a ship lying at the bottom of that lake there that also can testify to that too.
Mm-hmm. Several.
Wow.
Mm-hmm.
So anyway, so we bid everybody a shalom, and yes, Bob, the broadcast is live. This is my third one today, so I'm sure everybody is probably getting a little tired of looking at me and listening to the sound of my voice. So I'm going to let the two of you talk. So why don't you share with us, your journey to come to know Messiah? Because it's always special for me to talk to fellow Jewish believers, because I know how hard the journey was for me. I mean, when I came to faith, as many on this station know, I was open to Messiah. I mean, I had rejected the Reformed Judaism that I was brought up in. And yet at the same time, my mother, Oliva Shalom, she worked at a Ner Israel yeshiva for 20 years as the receptionist and secretary to the president, and or the principal rather. And neither of those resonated with me. And yet it still took me 3 years and God having to take everything away from me in order for me to finally submit. So when I talk to fellow Jewish believers, I'm always fascinated to hear how their story went. And so we have both of you who've gone through that journey. So why don't you share with us a little bit about that?
Sure, I'd love to. You wanna tell a little bit first, or
Okay.
yeah.
Okay, sure. Yeah. I can relate to what you're saying about the journey, how difficult that journey is for most Jewish people. I also was raised in the Reform segment of rabbinical Judaism, and really, felt that was a strong part of my identity growing up, and even, well into, beyond the formative years, just always taking that with me, always observing the high holy days. And it's just interesting that we happen to be talking to you on a high holy day, because that was always
indeed
such a big part of my life. Wasn't really good about observing Shabbat, but I always knew about it. And growing up, my family would would always light the candles and do the challah and have a special dinner. So there was that part of it, but the not understanding the commandments about not working on that day, you know, that somehow didn't really.
Well, let me ask you this. Did you ever read the Bible before
No.
you came to faith?
No, I didn't even read. Yeah. No.
And, you know, sorry, go ahead.
No, sorry, I didn't interrupt. I was just gonna add that even after I came to faith, it was a real struggle for me to read it because I felt like it was beyond my comprehension.
Mm-hmm.
And Jews aren't encouraged to read it, and I always felt it was not really even our book to read.
Mm.
It wasn't something that I really could do and should do.
Right.
So I had.
Well, I had the opposite experience, and I lived in Mexico. I had a business down there, and my partner was he was a Spaniard who had grown up in Cuba and defected to Canada. And so when I met him, he was living in Toronto. And I remember we were in the office down in Mexico. We lived in the Yucatan, about 4 hours from Cancun. And there was one day he liked art, and you know, art is of no interest to me really whatsoever. I'm not in any way an aficionado, but he was talking to me about, and he opened this book and he showed me a picture of a depiction of David and Bathsheba, and he's going on about it. I had no idea what it was. And he looked at me and he said, "You're Jewish and you don't know anything about this." That was the fulfillment of Romans 11:11, where he was provoking me to jealousy.
Right.
Because it was like, here is this goy who knows more about my history than I do. And I felt shamed at the time.
Yeah. I can very much relate to that.
Yeah.
No. Yeah. Really didn't know anything. But the only story I really knew was that of Moses, because I had watched the 10 Commandments so many times during Passover. But
Charlton Heston, a good Gentile boy.
Yeah. So
okay. So, you know, where did the journey really begin? What was the catalyst for you to start exploring this Jesus guy?
I would say it began as a kid, because I learned that most of my classmates who were Catholic worshipped the Messiah. And then I found out that he was Jewish, and I thought that has to be false information. He can't possibly be Jewish. I thought he was Catholic like them. So and I remember asking my father, and he said, yeah, he was Jewish. And I said, well, then why in the world don't the Jewish people worship him? And then he gave the typical answer, because he was killed, and he couldn't be Messiah because he's not here. There's no peace in the world, you know, those kinds of answers. But that still didn't make sense to me, because then why are these other people claiming him as Messiah? Why are these other people claiming this Jewish guy as a Messiah?
You're one up on me, because the only answer I got was, because that's what we do.
Oh, wow. Oh, wow.
So you can imagine how that went over.
Yeah. Well, my father was very well educated, and he actually taught Hebrew school. So he had more to say about that. Yeah.
All right.
I still didn't think that answer made any sense, because either he was the Messiah for everybody or he wasn't for everybody. So it didn't ever make sense to me, but I didn't really know what to do with it.
Right. Okay.
So, but that's where really where it began. And I was very provoked by that when I found out he was Jewish, and all these other people, because most of the world I came from was not Jewish. Jews were in the minority where I grew up. It was a very Catholic neighborhood. And all these Catholic people are saying he's a Messiah, but the Jews not. So I wrestled with that for many years. Still went along with what I was taught, but always wrestled with that, and didn't think I would ever really find an answer to it.
Okay.
But many years later, I came to a place in my job where I met another Jewish worshiper of Yeshua.
Okay.
And she was going to what she called this Messianic congregation. I said, "What's that? What's that? Never heard of that before." And so she told me it was a place where Jews and Gentiles worship together, and there are Jewish people who acknowledge that he's the Messiah. And I said, "Really?" I was just completely blown away by that. I said, "Well, I have to go with you. I have to check this out." So I went with her. It was Jonathan Cahn's congregation.
Okay.
At that time, I hadn't ever heard of him. Was way before he had written any books or was well known. He had still a very big congregation. This was in the 90s. So I went and I started attending with her and checking it out. It was very foreign to me, but I still had I would say a strong intrigue about exploring further. So that happened. Wasn't real consistent, but it happened frequently enough for a few years. So I was exploring. I was doing a lot of exploring with her because she had come to faith many years earlier and was familiar with the scriptures and answered many of my questions, although I still had a lot of arguments because I wasn't really ready to make that decision yet. Then I came to a place in my job where my job was in jeopardy and I was about to lose it. And I was terrified. And one of the union reps I was working with, another Jewish guy who I was also talking about Messiah with, just kind of talking to whoever would listen. And I remember him saying, because he knew I was really looking at whether Jesus was or wasn't the Messiah. And he said,
supportive of that.
No, he wasn't supportive of it, but I still was talking about it with him. But no, he wasn't.
You were evangelizing before you even knew what you were talking about.
Right, exactly. Exactly. I mean, to anybody who would listen, he was a friend also. And he was trying to help me with this work situation. And he said, if Jesus himself came out of the sky, he could save your job. Like this is hopeless, basically. Nope, it's not going to happen. Well, what happened thereafter was a miracle, because my job actually was saved. And as I normally tell in my testimony, and shortly thereafter, so was I, because I recognized that there's no way on earth, there's no other way to explain what happened with the salvation of my job. And it took me a while to put it all together. But I remember talking to someone else at Beth Israel, that's Jonathan's congregation where I was attending. And I told her the story, and she said, this was like, she just hit me with a ton of bricks. And don't you realize what just happened here? God saved your job. Don't you realize that that's confirmation? And then I couldn't withhold any longer. And I made my proclamation of faith. Yeah. Yeah.
Wow.
It just, just to add the missing piece there, what happened was one of the HR people had been out with a broken knee, and she had information that saved the job, but she was out for several months. She came back just in time to say, because I actually got the notice of termination, and then she came back, I think the day after, and said, "No, you can't fire her. She has protection. You can't fire her." So the timing was absolutely, God. Impeccable timing. It was miraculous timing.
And so after you make your profession, you commit your life to the Lord, what happens then?
Well, that took a while also. Telling people was difficult, especially my family. And at first I thought, like many Jewish people, I can't ever talk about this. I can't. But then I realized I can't hide this either. So I had to figure out a way to tell them, which, you know, they weren't very happy about, but they didn't, that they didn't abandon me or.
They didn't have the funeral.
No, it wasn't anything like that. No, they were still very loving, you know, didn't agree with my decision, but still.
You were a little meshuggah, but that's okay. I mean,
right, exactly. Yeah. Yeah.
Okay.
Exactly how that went over. And about 3 years after I came to that decision, I went on the Liberated Wailing Wall, a Jews for Jesus, because I always wanted to do something with music and fell in love with, I was always in love with cantorial music, and then discovered all of these Messianic Jews or Jewish believers, you know, however you want to say it, because they're, like you're saying, they're not all walking in that lifestyle of the necessarily Messianic, but Jewish people who come to faith in Messiah have written such wonderful, wonderful music, and fell in love with that and was exposed to that and decided, oh, I want to do this. I really want to do this. So I applied for that and got on the team, and actually was on 2 teams. And that's where I met David right after, because his team came on after my second team finished in San Francisco, and that was where we met. And that was the beginning of the journey. I was still a very young person in Messiah at that time, because it was only 3 years. I hadn't even read the Bible because I still was resistant. And it was on the team that I learned the importance of reading it, because my other teammates said, you need to read the Bible.
Right. Okay.
So, you know, I have grown so much since then.
And so when was this?
This was, let's see, 2001, where I joined the team.
Okay.
Yeah. I came to faith in 98.
It's the same year I did.
Wow.
Yep. I remember the exact date, the exact time, where I was, what had happened.
Yeah.
I asked people, I said, so, you know, when did you get saved? It was, well, you know, I don't know exactly. It was like, I can't relate to that at all, because for me, in psychology, they call it a flashbulb moment or flashbulb memory. It was like, I can recite to you the events of that entire week, almost like photographic memory.
Yeah. I can relate to that completely. Remember where I was also.
Yep.
All the
so David, tell us a bit about your journey and how you ended up where you did.
Well, it's just interesting to talk about God's timing, just kind of to go backwards, because you had an event that prevented you from applying to that music team, put it off a year, out of your control. And after I had come to faith, I was told, you need to apply to this team. You know, you can sing and play some instruments. And I was like, there's no way I'm going to do that. I'm not going to live on a bus. I'm an introvert, and there's no way. And they said, well, keep praying, you know, keep praying. And 6 years later, I woke up with a clearing that I've never experienced before. Like, why do I want to do this today? You know, and I looked in the mirror and I'm like, let's see how I feel tomorrow. And it was still there. And I joined the team. So there was just all these you know, coincidences. And that's how we met. Perfect timing.
Yeah.
But yeah, if I go back to a really nice, loving, being raised in a nice Jewish home, but yeah, very secular, reform like yourself. We didn't talk about God. And we certainly didn't open up the Torah, but we observed everything that was Jewish. It means so much, you know, the holidays and the foods and in synagogue and Shabbat. But then Shabbat fell by the wayside. We stopped lighting the candles, although we would still sing the chants. I didn't know what they meant for the most part. I knew a few Hebrew words.
Hmm.
But I was always seeking, and I was a quiet kid. Music was my voice,
Hmm.
and I was hurting on the inside. There was a lot that I was hurting about. And so when I got my chance, I escaped Toronto to go. I ran away from home up to Thunder Bay and really started to kind of try to heal what I was going through, and tried different things. I remember a summer of Buddhism. I know that a lot of Jewish people are very attracted to Buddhism.
They have a whole category for them.
That's right. With it.
Jews.
Yeah.
Or
Bujus, yeah.
Yeah. Yep.
You know, and that appealed to the moral sense, to the peace, you know, which I was looking for. But it didn't fill the deep hole. It didn't solve my questions.
I actually heard one time that 30%, and this is going back about 20 years, but 30% of all non-Asians who come into Buddhism are Jewish.
Wow.
I believe that.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Because we're looking for the peace. We don't get it at home.
Right.
Because Buddhism has, silence.
Mm-hmm. Yeah.
And Jews don't.
Yeah,
yes.
It's true. It was just sit.
Yeah.
And listen. So
attractive in that way.
So I tried that. I tried a number of other things. I was a staunch atheist for a long time. I've got a strong education in science and engineering. But even there, I was questioning, these laws that they keep teaching us. Well, you can tell from the history of science, they thought this was the law at that point, and that changed. And now this is the law. Oh, but that's changing. And now this is the law. I'm like, where's absolute truth? I really was seeking an absolute truth. I really felt that existed.
Right.
But in one of my kind of, I guess, very depressed moments, I was just really in a dark valley. I was crying out to the world, to whatever. And I opened my mouth and I said the name of Jesus. And I remember thinking that's a little strange for that to come out of me like that. And I really tried to forget it. Somewhere there was a kernel that, it's like that prayer for the Torah, God has put eternity in our heart. There was some part of me that was screaming out from that part that God put in. And then I found a New Testament in my grandmother's house, of all places.
Okay.
Don't think she was a believer. She may have been, but she had hired help that lived with her. And I think this New Testament was left over on a bookshelf.
Okay.
And I looked at it and I thought, I've judged this book because everyone's told me how I'm supposed to believe about this book and what's wrong with it. But I've never tested it myself. And that doesn't fit engineering, that doesn't fit science. So I thought, I need to open this book and read it, find out for myself, think for myself. And it wasn't anti-Semitic. It was a very Jewish book. I was quite surprised. Learning that most of the authors were Jewish, and following the Jewish Messianic prophecies, things I'd never really studied, and it all started to come out of the Word. But the real turning point for me was after leaving Thunder Bay. I joined a music band, a great bunch of people. We moved out of Thunder Bay because we had exhausted most of the venues there. Came down to Southern Ontario, lived in Guelph, wonderful Guelph. And I really kind of thought, my life is getting it all together. Now I'm in a band, we're doing music, we're playing clubs. We're going to make a CD, and I just really thought this was everything on my checklist, But when you talk about the day you remember, Princess Diana passed away at the end of October of 97 there.
August 31st.
Yeah.
August,
yeah, that's what I meant. Yeah,
Labor Day weekend.
Labor Day weekend. It really depressed me from the sense of, I knew I had an eating disorder. By the way, that's the other thing I discovered up in Thunder Bay. I was addicted to sugar. And it was a 12-step group that started saying, maybe there's something bigger than you. Step one, you're not in control here. So, and when Princess Diana, she was a spokesperson for a lot of the eating disorders, the anorexics and things like that. And I just thought, this is so typical. It's so sad. This is an icon that we put up on a pedestal. and were crushed by the loss. And somehow that just really affected me.
Hmm.
And I looked at my checklist and I said, you don't have the answer yet. And the next day I woke up, and the only way I can describe it was a I will often have trouble with describing how I felt. I was pulled out of bed with a voice, not an audible voice, but something that just said, you are finding a spiritual home today. And
Wow.
I'm thinking, that's crazy. It's Sunday. Only churches are open on Sundays. But it was such a strong pull. And I just kept going with it. And of course, the band was all asleep. We're all late night people. And here I am in early hours of the morning. I'm getting up, getting dressed, getting in my car. I'm like, where are we going? And the first church I find, Courtright Presbyterian in Guelph. I go in, sit in the back, so-called sinners' pews. And I sat there and witnessed a beautiful, loving service. But they were singing about Elijah. You know, they were singing that song, These Are the Days of Elijah.
Yep.
And I'm like, what are you people singing about a Jewish prophet for? You know, it just didn't make sense to me. But the whole thing had its impact on me. And I sat there and I started to cry, and I knew that I was home. Not home because it was Courtright Presbyterian, home because I had found Messiah. This was true. And I cried and I cried. A woman came up to me. She saw me at the back, and she gives me the business card for the Toronto office of Jews for Jesus because I look Jewish. I'm sitting there at the back. And I met the Barons from Jews for Jesus in Toronto, and professed my faith in Yeshua with them. And they were the first Jewish family I met that believed in Yeshua. Their house, they were serving Jewish food. It smelled Jewish. I realized I didn't have to leave being Jewish.
Right.
In fact, it was a very Jewish thing to do.
And, you know, for me, I tell people that was very critical, because both the synagogue and the church, they both tell us that when we believe in Yeshua, we're no longer Jewish.
Yeah.
And I remember that the night before I came to faith, I gave my life to the Lord, that I was sitting at the house of a guy by the name, I don't know if you knew him or not, Daniel Brodsky. Edward Daniel Brodsky. He was a teacher at Canada Christian College, had planted Messianic synagogues all over North America, Calgary, Philadelphia. And he was 81 years old at the time. And I'm sitting at his table, and he's going through a book that he had written for the course. And it was all about Yom Kippur and the Azazel and the scapegoat. And he's going through all these Messianic prophecies. And I'm looking, and all of a sudden the light goes on. It was like, I've been lied to my whole life.
Yeah.
And I got really mad.
Yeah. Yeah.
Because I was 28 years old. My life had been train wrecked. I mean, God just blew everything up. He has a habit of doing that, I find.
Yeah.
But all of a sudden, I'm confronted with the fact that the Messiah did come, and we have totally missed him.
Yeah.
And the very next night, I sat on my bed for 5 hours, and I just kind of played the movie reel. And it was 11 o'clock at night, and I said the sinner's prayer, and the Holy Spirit said to me, you had such a hard time reconciling me and your Jewish identity. Now you're going back to your people. And I just kind of went, oh.
Yeah.
Okay, I'm not going to do a Jonah, but, listen.
Yeah. Wow.
Yeah.
So it's a powerful experience when we realize when the veil is lifted off, and when we're confronted with that truth. And I remember at my wedding, I said, it was 15 years ago, and I said my Jewish family's all there, and they're gnashing their teeth and everything else. And I said, I came to realize that it was the most Jewish thing in the world to believe in Yeshua as the Messiah. I had family members get up and walk out and not talk to me for years after that.
No.
Yeah. That's a very common story. Fortunately, like with Joni's family, my family didn't disown me. So that's
Mhm.
been a real blessing.
Well,
But,
mine didn't disown me. They tolerated me. I had one uncle who took me to see Jews for Judaism.
oh, they did.
Oh yeah.
Yeah, I went to get deprogrammed.
Yeah.
But the funny thing is my uncle is a militant anti-theist. Like, I got called an idiot at his Passover table one year for believing in creation.
That's just so.
And so after he and I get done dealing with the rabbi, and that was a whole story in itself, but I turn to him and I say, "You don't believe in God.
Mm.
Why do you care about which one I do?" And he
Mhm.
said, "Because that's what our people have always done." I'm thinking, well, it's a good thing you're not a lemming.
Yeah.
But
Yeah.
you see, it's so entrenched that
Yeah.
most of my family are atheist or agnostic. They don't believe anything. But when you come and say you actually do believe in something, you
Yeah.
can believe whatever you want except that.
Right.
Exactly.
Because that's not what our people do.
Right. Yep.
But why?
Right.
They can't give you an answer.
No.
Mm-hmm.
And when you dig
So
into the history, we do. So many of our people did believe it and do believe it.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
Well, more Jewish people have been saved in the past 50 years than the previous 1,850 years.
Yeah.
Right.
Yep.
That's right. Yeah.
And I believe that is the fulfillment of prophecy where the
Yeah.
fig tree starts to bud.
Yeah.
So
Times.
you two meet and you get married and you're living in California now. Talk a little bit about that. How did you make your way down there?
Well, we were brought here because of the tour.
Okay.
The Lived Up tour at Jews for Jesus, and we didn't think we were gonna stay here. We really didn't have any intention of staying here. David had a house in Guelph, and I had my stuff in storage back in Jersey. So we of course we didn't know we were gonna meet. We were tending to just go back, but once we met, we didn't know what to do. David got the job with the ministry in the office at headquarters, and I got another job, and my sister was here and she's starting a family, so there were a lot of factors that came into play that kept us here. And then we discovered our Messianic congregation, where we lead worship now, Brit Hadashah. So we just ended up building a life here that we weren't ever intending to, but God obviously put all the pieces in
Wow.
in play for that to happen.
Yeah.
So here we are. Yeah, that wasn't, again, man can, where's that scripture? God directs the steps, but man has his plans, but God directs the steps. It's one of those situations.
Right.
Yeah.
Or man plans and God laughs. And
Yes.
Right.
I love it.
Right. Because we didn't ever say, oh, we're gonna stay over here. We didn't even think about that. But God just put everything together in such a way that we built a life here. And this was how it worked out.
And so you've been down there for how long now?
18 years. Well, for me, longer for you.
Not really, because I don't count the time on the bus. I wasn't really.
You were everywhere.
I was everywhere. Yeah. Yeah. So about 18
years
for both of us. Yeah.
Which is a good number.
It is a good number.
Yeah. Good number.
Yeah.
But I wanted to say that it's okay. Believers wake up some mornings and you're like, I am crazy. This is crazy. I've got a committee in my head and they're not always all at peace. And I remember one particular day visiting my brother and sister-in-law, who I love dearly, in Toronto, staying at their house. And I had become a believer. I'd already professed my faith at this point.
Yeah.
But still some struggles, of course, we're working it out. And part of me said, you know what, your problem is you're not married. You need to get married and that's going to solve everything. They got a house, they've got kids, you just need to do this. And here I am again trying to solve my own problems, even though I've accepted the Lord into my life. So I say big goodbye to them. I get in my car to drive back to Guelph. And as I'm leaving the backing out of the driveway, there's a neighbor, I guess, I don't know, a little old Jewish man. And he's waiting for me to back up. And I motioned to him, go ahead, I'll wait for you. He thinks I'm telling him to get in the car. He walks around and he gets in the driver's side of this car, and he's sitting there, and he looks at me, he says, do you know the way to Bathurst Street, which you're familiar with?
Yeah.
I said, yeah. He says, you can drop me at Bathurst Street. Okay, total stranger. We drive in silence 2.5 blocks over to Bathurst. He says, right here. Pull over, gets out. I think that's the end of it. Then he looks at me, he goes, are you married? I said, no. He said, don't rush into it. And he walked away. And I even gives me chills today. I cannot believe that. That's like a total angel has just told me. His new what
No, that's a total Jewish thing to do.
It is.
And no other culture in the world can. Well, maybe the Greeks or the Italians or something like that. But I mean, that's so typical. Is just what Christians don't understand is how Jews can argue and then go out and have a beer later.
Yes.
That's very
Yes.
true. Yeah.
We can disagree, and it doesn't mean that the world is ended and that the
Right.
relationship is done.
Right.
Because it's a very aggressive culture, and
Yes.
part of that I think is just because of the survival instinct that we've had to cultivate over the centuries.
For sure.
And God chose our people, I think, because Abraham, I don't want to get into a whole message here on this, but Abraham argued with God. He challenged him. He negotiated with him. And that's very much part of our DNA is, my wife, she has a big heart for Jewish people, and she grew up in Eastern Europe. For all we know, she may have Jewish lineage. We don't know that. And God very specifically told her, you're not to get a DNA test to find out, because you're my child, irrespective. But,
Nice.
there are times she says, stop answering a question with a question. I say, but that would be denying who I am if I did that.
So Jewish.
Well, and it was even for me, our family was very, raised on Beethoven, Brahms, and Mozart. My dad was a wonderful pianist.
Okay.
And so we didn't do a lot of arguing in that Jewish sense. But when I married a New Jersey girl,
okay.
and they got the energy. And I kept saying, are you angry with me?
Yes.
I'm not angry. This is the way I talk.
No, she's from Jersey.
That's right. That adds a whole other component thing
To the layer.
Yeah, because Canadian Jews are much
A little more
much calmer and less argumentative
Yeah.
than Israeli Jews, for example. It's on a sliding scale.
Well, Israeli Jews are surrounded by 300 million people who want to see their destruction. It
Right.
kind of makes sense.
Right.
It does.
Right. That adds a lot.
And I've never fit the model for the Canadian. I must have been switched at birth, or the stork dropped me off at the wrong place. I don't know, but
Okay. Well, you're in good company.
I much more fit into the New York, New Jersey style than I do up here.
Yeah, you're in great company then.
Yeah. I told my brother years ago we were going for a walk at my aunt's Pesach Seder one night, Rosh Hashanah. I can't remember what it was. I was just kind of talking to him, but the challenge is as the only believer in the family. And I looked at him, I said, well, there's a reason why God chose me first in this family.
He knew.
Yep.
Yep.
Well, I grew up being a wallflower in the sense of a people pleaser. I was the middle child, the peacemaker. Just so for me to step out of that role and do this terrible thing, it also pointed me to the fact that God was in control, because it's not something I would ever do in my training, in my temperament.
Yeah.
It's the furthest thing I would do.
Yeah.
Right.
Pleaser. Yeah.
So
very true. Now it has to be God, because it's not something you would do on your own.
Exactly. And the scripture about God, using it all to the good for those who are called according to his purpose. And
Mhm.
when I told my family, when I told my parents, and I was very frightened of that.
Mm.
My dad was very upset. He cried
Mm. Wow.
and ran out of the room. And my mother went to console him. And she was very supportive. She's like, just a second, I'll go. She comes back and she says, I need to thank you. She says, I haven't seen him cry in years. You know, and it was a blessing to her to see her own husband emote.
Yeah.
And I thought,
Yeah.
God's using even this situation in her life.
Wow. Isn't
Yeah.
that something?
Yeah.
Powerful.
My goodness.
Yeah.
Yeah, I had about a week until my mother found out. And I didn't really hide it, but I wasn't exactly forthcoming. And then we were on our way to congregation or church. It was a cousin who had led me to the Lord, and boy, when she found out, that was an interesting conversation we had. And but you know, what are you going to do? It's because I always said to God that if Yeshua is your son, you have to tell me in a way that I can know and I can understand, because otherwise I don't want anything to do with him, because I knew what the cost was going to be.
Right.
But at the same time, I also understood that if this is true, I want to know what it is. I don't
Right.
care how costly the truth is. I just want to know the truth. I've always maintained, I don't care what it is I'm dealing with. Just tell me what I'm dealing with.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I tell my family this all the time. Don't sit there and beat around the bush with me. Just tell me.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I'm not going to get offended if the answer is no, but I'm going to get
Yeah.
offended if you kind of skirt around things and lead me on.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And boy, but it was my mother and I, we had a great relationship, and she ended up dying 2 years later from cancer. She was only 57.
Wow.
And other than my faith, we had a wonderful relationship. I was very close to her, but it was that, and she just couldn't get her head around it.
Mm-hmm.
Sure.
Yeah.
I'll keep praying for people in our lives that are similar to that. When I started attending this Presbyterian church,
Mm-hmm.
and they turned out to be full of spirit, full of life. The spirit
Mm-hmm.
was moving them. But they were asking me all these Jewish questions, and I couldn't answer them. So I had to dig into the Word and start learning my own Torah. And I never had seen passages like Isaiah 53.
Yeah.
I had
Right.
never seen Jeremiah 31, you know, with the new covenant.
Yeah,
These were
yeah.
never told to me.
Mm.
Yeah.
So it was very encouraging to go back to the Jewish books and see Messiah
Yeah.
clearly prophesied there.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah.
And then to learn in Talmud that Yeshua was mentioned.
Yeah.
Although they thought he was crazy, he did exist. He was mentioned. He made an impact. Even the negative response proved quite a bit to me.
Yeah.
Mm-hmm.
So, and all those things about the cloth on the door, the scarlet
Oh yeah.
cloth on the temple door that didn't turn red.
Right.
Things all that happened
Yeah.
after
Yeah.
the temple was destroyed, and the timings all lined up with Yeshua, and I was amazed. Like,
And
how is that all coincidence?
And we still can't get through that blindness. It's just, you know, I remember the first time I did a Passover Seder at a Presbyterian church. It was back in 2001, and I had a friend of mine, and she had come with me. And as we were driving back home, she says, "How come they can't see it?" Because 2 Corinthians 3 says that there's a veil that lies over
Right.
their heart when they read the Torah, and it's a
Right.
spiritual blindness. It is a
It is.
judicial blindness.
It is. Yeah.
And I think a lot of Gentile people don't understand how incredibly difficult being a Jewish believer is, and having this burden
Yeah.
for your family and for your community, and
Yeah.
not being able to do anything about it. I mean, listen, we can preach the most eloquent of sermons, but unless the Holy Spirit does the
Right.
leading.
Right.
And one of the first verses I ever memorized was John 6:44. No one comes unto me unless the Father who sent me draws him.
Right.
So
Right. Right.
we just keep throwing enough against the wall out there, and hopefully something sticks one day. But, you know, Paul was the apostle to the Gentiles, but every city he showed up in, the first thing he did was he went to the synagogue.
Right. Yeah.
Because, brethren, My heart's desire
Mhm.
and prayer for them is that they may be saved.
Mhm.
Yes.
So talk to us a little bit about what's going on with your ministry now. Do you have children? We never
No.
got to that.
We have
You
two
never had
cats.
children.
You're a cat lover, I know.
Yes,
Okay.
We have 2 cats. Yeah.
Okay.
that's as close as we got.
All right. And so, talk a little bit about your ministry. What are you doing with music now? So David, you're still obviously playing and whatnot.
Yeah.
At least at the congregation anyway.
Yeah, we have a wonderful ministry, leading worship at Brit Hadashah in Concord, and a tremendous family. We just started a new sanctuary. We've given that to the Lord. It's a holy place, and we worship Him there. Yeshua's proclaimed, and Joni and we work together on decisions, and she helps with her gifts, and I help with mine. It's a great partnership. We've got a great team, a music team, and just coming out of COVID now, it's been great to get back together and worship live.
Yeah.
I'm also an elder there, and so these are all things that are stretching me. God called me to these roles, and I'm like, I don't want to do this. Because it's okay. With God, all things are possible.
May need a little coffee in there once in a while, but yes.
It does help.
Yes.
It really helps. I also have YouTube videos of arrangements that I've written, Jewish and Christian hymns and melodies. And I get a lot of connection with people from around the world who either are very comforted or want to know more about Yeshua. I wish there was even more of that type of connection. But now I'm selling the sheet music too. People have written me, cellists have written saying, I want to play that arrangement. So that's been a new source of joy for me to slave away at the sheet music and put that out there.
Right. Okay.
Yeah.
Wonderful. And Joni, you're doing social work now, I understand.
Yes.
And so talk to us a little bit about that. How does God use you in that situation?
He certainly does open doors for me to talk about Messiah quite a bit. Many of my clients are Christian.
Okay.
I think I've only had one Jewish client at this job anyway. And even with her, God had opened a few doors. I was at an appointment, well, just to give you an example, I was at an appointment with her and her mom came. And her mom was asking about, because we were talking about, Jewish things. And I think that might have been during the High Holy Days as well, before this was right in the beginning of the pandemic, I think.
All right.
And there was some holiday coming up. And she's asking, we were talking about that, and she said, "Oh, what congregation do you go to?" And I was like, "Ooh, now I, she's asked me, so I have to talk about this." There was no other way to avoid this situation. Plus, I mean, not that I should avoid it, but it's complex. It adds a complexity because, I can't really evangelize at the job. However, if God opens a door, I'm going to walk through it. So I had to tell her, I gave the name of the congregation. I said, it's a Messianic congregation. And, those are settings where Jews and Gentiles worship Jesus as the Messiah together. So I came to faith, and I had to explain all of that. And she, she didn't turn away in horror or anything. She just listened. She was more my age. The client was, quite a bit younger because, she was like, 20 something. So her mom and I were of similar age, and the client didn't. She was focused mostly on her medical issues, but her mom and I had an interesting conversation about that. And,
wow.
I was really grateful that she didn't turn away in horror or walk out or storm out or anything like that. So, but God often will work through those situations. And that was really significant because she happened to be Jewish. my only Jewish client there.
Mhm.
But I have many Christian clients who
Right.
are hurting and vulnerable and open to talking about Messiah. So my faith comes up quite a bit.
Amen.
And I definitely get to minister, which is wonderful.
Hmm.
Yeah.
Okay. Wonderful. So talk a little bit. I mean, we've talked about the difficulty in Jewish ministry and how heartbreaking it can be and frustrating. I mean, you look at Jeremiah and he's like, I don't want to go.
Yeah.
God says, I know you don't want to go, but you have to go because, and they're not going to listen. I mean, you
Mhm.
look at Isaiah 6 and God says, who shall we send and who shall go for us? And Isaiah probably without even, kind of like you, David, and says, Hineni, here I am, send me.
Yeah.
And then he says, you're going to go, you're going to speak. They're not going to listen. You're going to show they're not going to see. And Isaiah says, for how long? And God says, till I judge them. I mean, you talk about a ministry that's set up for failure in kind of the North American, especially U.S. Way of measuring things. And that's kind of what a lot of us have to deal with, is that most of our ministry would be considered failure because we don't have the converts, as it were. But you have had successes, you have had victories. So why don't you share a little bit about that as we kind of wrap this up?
Sure. Well, in my work, I don't get a lot of opportunity to bring people to know Yeshua directly. Like right now, the wonderful day job I have at Jews for Jesus in the IT department, I help keep the machinery functioning, especially the IT, and I can pray for all the workers who are out there. With the music, again, the people that come to me and just want encouragement. I find myself, like Isaiah 40, just want comfort my people, comfort my people. There's a lot of that I'm called to, but there have been great answers to prayer, especially with your father.
Yeah.
And yeah, we just see a lot of success, but it's not. I'm not an evangelist per se. Yeah.
Okay. And not everybody is called to be. I mean, it's an office.
Right. But in that moment, if I will open my mouth and say what I believe, what's happened to me, what I know God can do, yes, I believe in Yeshua. I will open my mouth as called to tell people, and I'll wear the clothing too. I've had a lot of conversations just wearing the Yeshua caps and the scripture shirts, and on the BART trains here. There's sometimes it's just that can trigger a good conversation with someone.
I did the STEP program back in 2001. It was 3 months before 9/11. And so we were on the streets of New York, and I'm walking out there like a billboard. And it's not often I feel intimidated, but boy, standing on Brooklyn over there and King's Highway in Brooklyn with the ball cap and the T-shirt, and you get all these Orthodox Jews, and handed out a tract to this one woman, and she walks about 20 feet away and she stops to look at it, and I said, oh Lord, here it comes. And she looks up and she says, you idiot, and she comes over and just starts yelling at me.
That's very Jewish too.
Oh yes. I always tell people, you want to stretch your boundaries, you go hand out tracts to Jewish people in New York City.
Wow. Yeah, and you never know who else is watching too. God's got control over the whole situation. I remember being yelled at. I was in the streets of Toronto, right down at King and Yonge.
Yep.
King and Bay, right at the business center.
Central District. Yep.
And I was being yelled at by somebody. I was handing out a tract, and it was one of those funny tracts that tries to get your attention. It says, "Beware of religious." What's it? Beware of religious
fanatics handing out literature. Yeah.
Anyway, this person was yelling at me, and I just had the peace to know, well, this is true to me, and I've seen what God's done in my life. Part of me's freaking out because I don't like people yell at me, but I just held my ground, and they went away. And another person came up to me later and said, I saw you. and you were just so calm.
Mm.
And it was really amazing. Like, tell me, what are you doing? So it opens up conversations. And people are always looking at us.
Yeah.
Yeah, and you never know, and that's why they say never put if you're prone to speeding, never put the fish on your bumper sticker.
Right. Yes.
Right. Because you want to always be a good witness.
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Well, we've come to the end of our hour, and I feel we could probably continue this conversation for a lot longer because there's many more things that we could talk about. I want to thank you two so much for taking time out of your busy lives and schedules to be able to share your story with us. I trust and hope it's been an encouragement to those who've been watching live, and the ones who will be watching on demand, same thing. And we'll just have to commit to be praying for one another, because that burden still rests there. And no matter what joy of the Lord we have, there's always the sadness that we can't share it with our families.
Yes.
Well, thank you so much.
Yes.
It's been a great pleasure.
It's great getting to know you also, hearing about your story.
Yes, indeed. Well, it's been a lot of fun. And so we've come to the end of another episode of Superheroes for the Messianic Lifestyle. I trust you've been blessed and ministered to. David and Joni, the Lord bless you and keep you, and make his face shine upon you, be gracious unto you, and may he lift up his countenance upon you and give you his shalom.
Thank you.
Amen.
All right, folks. Thank you very much for joining us. And once again, we bid you a Shavua Tov, and we'll look forward to seeing you next week right here on Superheroes for the Messianic Lifestyle on Lamb Radio Network. Shalom Aleichem.
Shalom. Thank you.
We are richly blessed to bring you what we believe is the fullest, most diverse, yet up-to-date progressive teachings, discussion, and prayer programming you can find anywhere on this planet. Be sure to take the tour of the MessianicLambRadio.com website. I'm Susan Hugie, thanking you for joining us on the Messianic Lamb Video Network.